Yeah, we talk about it. It's a feeling, and that's okay because what we talk about in terms of community control, it's hard to measure. So when we talk about governance, we can tick boxes, and it's often compliance stuff, or it's it might be strategic planning and other really important business processes. But for us, that's kind of the Western side of governance. Then for community control governance, it is about feelings and about how people feel when they walk into a clinic or walk into a program, or when they attend a school program like Deadly Choices, and how those kids feel when they graduate. Those things are, that feeling is something that we want to be able to measure. And it's okay that we can't measure it because this whole concept of measurement is kind of like a Western construct anyway. So we say that's community control, and that makes sense to us. It means probably very little to funding bodies and others, but if you ever feel it when you walk into a clinic, and we've had a discussion with a couple of people from the judging panel, they definitely feel it. So it's real and it's fundamental because that's what provides, I think, the momentum for change, which empowers people to be positive about their health. That this whole conversation about gaps is one that we want to turn on its head, because the real gap we talk about is the gap between what we do and what we could be doing, our potential, not for government to determine and describe our families and kids as deficits and gaps that must be externally, the solution sits outside community to address the problem. It's definitely about how do we create that internally, and that feeling is what we want to be able to measure. The vibe's probably the corny way to describe it, but that's Mick Dodson, we can blame him for that one. Yes. That's his description, but it's definitely real, and we say this, it's okay we can't measure it because it's not a Western construct. It is about emotion and social well-being, fundamental things that must be part of a health system if what we want to do is improve health outcomes for First Nations people.
Yeah. Half of our population is under the age of 25. We need to, this thing about, and we probably 5 years ago, you continue looking back at all the great things that would happened in the 70s and 70s, and that was probably because that's right, people had a lot less than what we had, and were working really hard too, and actually did it was when to make a difference. And so at some point we've changed in the thing of being, and it's that moral authority that you get from old people with, think of our Auntie Pam, our patron, and Uncle Stephen and others, too many to name, but certainly for Auntie Pam as our patron of the Institute, and about the work she's done. So then everything that you do then, so whilst you acknowledge that, and that's important, you're in 2014 now. What is it you need to do now, And don't worry, because, and I would never dare to speak for Aunt, but there was certainly maybe a lull there for a little while in our organisation. The oldest, you can say all this thing, your oldest organisation, it's all deadly and, things, but there's certainly a lull. So that we're respectful of those things, and always would go back to Auntie Pam at times. Certainly the leadership across the organisation, we always will touch, back on those people. There's others in the community, definitely. But then when you open your service, when you have your service or you're designing your program, it's a thing about for young people, and not in a, it's so corny because people talk about young people, me now, is that that it's a space for them that is theirs, and what their identity now and who it is that they are now in 2014 needs to stop being defined by people who are over 30, because it's their existence, it's their time. So these spaces that we provide for them, so they go to the gym and they work with the old people. People who are over 60 then engage with them differently because they really are young people to them. There's this middle-aged sort of gap where we're all, gammon like we're going to, or, pretend like we're going to support young people in a piecemeal sort of a way. So this vibe thing is something about constantly when we're designing our programs, designing our stuff, half of our population is under the age of 25. And yes, they need to have a voice. And I think in the first thing of designing the program, because we have the experience around what that is, but it's then how do they feed into it? How do they participate and own it? That's by them having the ownership, this is the vibe. Now, for anybody who comes to your organisation and sees your organisation, now it should be whether or not, so if for argument's sake your funding agreement says you've got to access 200 clients, it should be that a funding body or an elder, anybody could go talk to, whether or not it's the CEO, whether or not it's the cleaner, whether or not it's your client, whether or not it's a disgruntled somebody, that they'll all understand what the organisation does, what the program's supposed to be there for, because it's that ownership then. Mick talked about it before. By spreading the ownership of it, that's the leadership of it. and it's their program there. So it's really important that to get the vibe thing, people have to feel like it's theirs. And that's what we've done. There's that reflection on the past, and definitely do that, but also put it in the context of it's 2014. 1970, 1980, whatever, 90s, the 2000s. It's a very different time. It's always shifting. So, yes, be reflective on the past and be respectful of that for sure, but make sure you're hitting the mark with the kids now, because it's slipping through our fingers, That's how we get the vibe too.
Yeah.